Welcome. Here we are again. This is our 5th year bringing to you current issues in the world of autism. This year we're focusing on accessibility for autistic children, their families, adults, self-advocates throughout the city of Philadelphia and possibly beyond as well. Over the years we've covered many topics. This topic is becoming especially near and dear to everyone's heart. Recently, we learned that the diagnostic rates of children on the autism spectrum has risen to 1 in 88 children. Those rates, we think, are fairly consistent across the lifespan as well, which means that it behooves all of us in the community to become aware, to become advocates in our own ways in supporting individuals on the spectrum and their families. Today we have assembled a wonderful group of panel members to discuss the various aspects of accessibility in Philadelphia, from initial diagnosis through trying to support families through the process of obtaining proper services, through developing relationships with schools and how the education aspects affect autistic children, and finally talking about how all of that folds into the community, where all of us are responsible to embrace and support those on the spectrum. We have with us today Dr. Carole Patrylo from LaSalle University, of course, Dr. Felicia Hurewitz from Drexel. We have Sabra Townsend, of course, recent recipient of the Small Miracles Award for her advocacy in the autism community, and Dr. Wendy Ross, developmental pediatrician in private practice now. So I'd like to allow them to give a bit of an introduction about their connection to accessibility in Philadelphia for autistic people and their families. And we'll start with Carole.
Oh, thanks, Eric. This is now my 22nd year being involved with the ASD population, and I'm coming from the educator's perspective. Working with families, one of the issues is navigating the system. And I'm full-time faculty member and also the associate director of autism here at the university. And in regard, these women will talk very specifically about navigating the system. But from the educational perspective, we realized here at LaSalle, and we're cross-discipline, so it's not one department working with this population. Absolutely. And I'll be talking later about this, but the systems approach, and so on the graduate level, we bring into coursework the 3 systems. And the 3 systems would be the family, the school, and the community mental health system. So that's where I'm coming from in regard to LaSalle.
Thank you. Felicia.
Thank you. I'm an assistant professor in the psychology department at Drexel, and I started working in autism quite some time ago, maybe 10 years ago. Actually, I think it was more like 14 years ago. I have now an adolescent son who has high-functioning autism or Asperger's. I also have done a lot of work with families, consulting, and trying to help them to navigate the system and to have a successful outcome for their children. And in addition, when I came to Drexel, I decided to do some direct services for people with autism, and so I created the Drexel Autism Support Program, which we call DASP, which helps support students who are matriculated at Drexel to be successful in college life, including academics, social integration, and eventually employment after they leave Drexel.
Thank you so much. Sabra.
Hi. My name is Sabra Townsend, and I work in the community in terms of providing services to not only families but systems that affect family members who have children or young adults on the spectrum. And I always mention systems because there are always more than one. The family itself is a system that works how systems work, but then there's an education system, there's the health system, there's the insurance system, there's behavioral health, there's medical or physical health. And all of these systems in some way impact the life of a child who has the diagnosis. I think that it also helps to look at it from the perspective of the child, because they work very hard as well to fit in, and sometimes in ways that we may not imagine, that they have to work to fit into a world that they may not always understand and that may not always understand them. I come at it a little differently because my background is that of an industrial engineer, so I think of it sometimes as a project base, but as a parent, I'm also the parent of a teenager on the spectrum, so there are challenges that happen on a daily basis. There's always a surprise around the bend.
Absolutely. Wendy.
So I'm a developmental and behavioral pediatrician, and I feel really lucky because I get to integrate the medical and the therapeutic and the educational pieces for my families. It's really hard to give a diagnosis of autism regularly. It's really life-changing for the families, and I used to compensate for that by making sure they had really good individualized educational plans. And then what I was hearing from my families was they felt like they couldn't go out into the world. And so with an interdisciplinary group, including an occupational therapist from the University of the Sciences in Philadelphia, and with a psychologist and a speech and language pathologist, we started a nonprofit, Autism Inclusion Resources, and we work specifically on community inclusion. And while most inclusion programming for the individual and with the disability focuses on them, we also specifically focus on the community. If you had somebody in a wheelchair, you wouldn't just show them how to use it and not have a ramp and expect them to hop curbs. So, so we have a multifocal lifespan approach, and one of our big projects is at the airport, which I can talk about later. But we prepare the sites, we prepare families, and then we have supported experiences leading to more independent experiences. And it's a model that we plan on spreading across the whole city, finding outcomes, measuring outcomes, and replicating nationally.
Wonderful. So. Let's back up just a little bit, because before we're exploring the community, before we have access to museums and airports and schools even, there's the child. Child is born. Developmentally, things progress, some things more quickly than others, some there may be some delays. Where do parents start to identify when there might be an issue? What do they do about that? And from a developmental pediatrician perspective, how do you guide them through that process?
Well, one of the key things that I do is I always try to educate pediatricians that are training in pediatricians, so that when parents come with their concerns, or teachers bring their concerns to parents, and then parents go to their pediatrician, there's a sense of who needs to be referred. And then usually what will happen next is people will get referred to a developmental pediatrician or a neurologist. There's a really long wait for developmental pediatricians, so I always encourage pediatricians to send people to the early intervention system, the intermediate unit, or the school district, because they will be providing the services. So the sooner you get on that list to get evaluated, the sooner you're going to get services.
So for folks watching here in Philadelphia,
right,
that means probably Elwyn.
Right. So if you're under the age of 3 in Philadelphia, that's ChildLink. 3 to 5 is Elwyn, and then over 5 is the school district.
Gotcha, gotcha.
And any parent can reach out. They don't need a doctor or a specialist to reach out. And that's the first thing I tell people when they come to see me. So you might as well get a head start on that.
That's right.
And I know that there are some families that that may be somewhat hesitant to jump into that land of kind of questioning whether their child is developing appropriately. What have you seen? Maybe other folks can chime in as well. What is that process like for families when they start to make that initial realization that they need some help?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about that. You know, sometimes by the time families come to me, they have a sense that there's something wrong, and some of them are a little bit relieved to have a name for it, or to have a path. You know, and of course there is a process of grieving, but you know, the prognosis is really quite different than it was before. So sometimes I just encourage people not to focus on the label, but it's still their child, and everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and we just want to use those strengths to scaffold the areas that are harder. So, but
I think from a parent perspective, I always not only take this perspective myself, but also work with families to understand that that was their child the day before they got the diagnosis, and it's the same child the day after, and to focus on what they can do to become knowledgeable about where they can go, what they can do, and also what they can do at home to match what's happening either in a daycare center or with early intervention services, or if the diagnosis comes later at school age. The parent is certainly encouraged to be involved and stay involved. I often joke that it's the full-time job that you never get paid for. And that's any parent. I mean, that's parenting in general, but specifically with a child on the spectrum, it really does become a broader approach. You have to start to learn not only what needs to happen from an academic perspective. You may learn new terms as it relates to behavioral health. You may learn new issues that relate to medical or physical if there's some physical challenges involved. But it's certainly, the earlier the parent chooses to be involved, the better. And I certainly agree with Dr. Ross in terms of not so much focusing on the label as focusing on what the child can do and what the challenges may be, so that you can focus on where help can be provided.
I think it's important for families to know that early intervention serves lots of children, including children who don't have a very severe deficit. If the child has a delay in two areas, two domains, or if they have a significant delay, a more severe delay in one domain, then they can get services. And many of those children just get, let's say, speech services for a while until 3, and then go on and never need any more services, and maybe don't ever have a label. So it's actually a very common thing to get early intervention services, and one shouldn't, you know, stop because, oh, that's going to somehow stigmatize the child to get those services. They come to your home for early intervention. They work around your schedule. It's very family-centric. In a way, it's the most accessible of the services you can get for a child. And so, you know, it's a good time to start then, and to start to see how does the child compare in different domains to other children, so you can see if there really is an issue, or maybe if your expectations or a school's expectations are too high. Like some schools want every child potty trained by a certain age. Maybe that expectation is just not an appropriate developmental expectation, or they want, you know, children to behave in a certain way that isn't age appropriate. So you get to, by getting an early intervention assessment, you get some sort of baseline about how your child compares, and if there really is an issue that you have to pursue further.
It sounds like there's a lot of agreement on our panel that, you know, even though families may have some sense of fear about an initial diagnosis and about seeking out services, that it's not really something to be afraid of. If your child is showing some, you know, developmental delays of any kind, or there's some, you know, folks in the extended family that are saying, well, I'm not sure if that's what we expect from a child, or what have you, it's okay to get things checked out.
I think the issue of fear is helped or ameliorated with information. If there's information that can be brought about a particular issue, then being scared about it or being worried about it, you know, that may never really go away, but certainly if you're armed with knowledge, then you have a basis from which to work to ask for the sort of services that you need.
Absolutely.
That knowledge base, you know, I'm here at the university. Why do we fear things? Because we don't know about it, right? And the less you know more about it, you have a greater understanding of it, the fear is going to remove itself. And I have to say one thing, it's always the strengths of the child, okay? From the educational perspective, and with the IEP, we're working off the strengths. And I never like to hear weaknesses, because that's not what it's about. It's about address their needs. but comes through with the
Right.
strengths.
Right, it's about using the strengths
Yes.
to create scaffolding
Yes.
to support everything. And I always encourage parents, which is why I'm so glad that Sabra is here, because she has such a wonderful support group for families. And sometimes families really learn the most from each other about resources. And I know I've always learned a lot from my patients about resources, and from Autism Sharing and Parenting is a huge resource in the city.
One of the things that we did as a group of parents got together and realized that some of what they were doing could be shared with other parents. You might purchase a book and realize it may be a grade or two above where you are at the current time, but another family may be able to use it. And what came out of those discussions was an organization that was founded by Renee Henderson, and the name of the organization is Autism Sharing and Parenting. There's a website, autismsharingandparenting.org. And it is a support organization, but it is much more than that, because from a parent perspective, we also look to bring presenters and hands-on examples of how to address certain challenges or certain issues. So, for instance, a recent discussion focused on the service levels within an IEP, but other topics have focused on what to do literally in the home when you have a young one who may be 3 or 4 and you have an older child. You know, some of the practical day-to-day issues that families face.
I think it's incredibly important for families to become connected like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
And when we come back from the break, we're going to be actually talking about how we can bring those supports into the school systems as well, as children age up and become ready for that next step. And so we'll see you after the break. Thank you.
Savings Man here with a story for you about 2 young spenders named Tommy and Sue. Their parents let them buy whatever they chose, like video games and designer clothes. As they grew older, they spent all their pay on fancy cars, houses, 2 lattes a day. They lived in the moment, never saving a dime. When they tried to retire, they run out of time. Working forever is Tom and Sue's fate, so choose to save now before it's too late. Visit our website to find out more, 'cause a happy ending's worth saving for.
Did you know that the average Social Security benefit is only $780 a month?
I didn't know that.
Did you know that most people will spend 20 years in retirement?
I didn't know that.
Did you know that a 40-year-old who saves $20 a week can have $75,000 when they retire?
I didn't know that.
There's a lot you might not know. To get free information about savings, visit our website or call this number.
I know what to do now.
Every day, thousands of people are diagnosed with macular degeneration, a disabling eye disease that leads to severe vision loss. As a scientist conducting research for the American Health Assistance Foundation, I want you to know that there is hope that a cure and new treatments for macular degeneration will soon be found, but only if we can continue our groundbreaking research. Learn about my research. Call 1-800-437-2423 or visit ahaf.org for free publications on eye disease.
And now, another adventure with Savings Man.
This is great. Every day should be like this.
It will be when I retire in a few years. I've been planning and saving.
Did you save for me?
Well, this is unexpected.
Where'd you come from? Out of the blue, just like an illness, an emergency. Or
That's enough, Mr. Unexpected.
Savings Man.
There's still time to plan. Find out how at choosetosave.org with a ballpark estimate worksheet.
I will. Thanks, Savings Man.
No, thank you.
So visit choosetosave.org today.
Welcome back. During the break, we've been actually discussing ways to connect families to resources, and not only for early intervention, but as the children move on through development. And I know that Wendy and Sabra both had a couple of of places that you wanted to share as well. Would you like to start, Wendy?
Yeah, well, one great new resource in the city is being funded by Jewish Family and Children's Services, and it's a website, specialneedsphilly.org. And there's special needs resources from birth to death, not just for autism, but for other special needs. And I think that's going to be a great resource for the city and hopefully unify some of what people can locate. Because I think one of the biggest problems is sort of that navigation piece.
Yeah.
Remember also that even now in the age of the internet and tweeting and sending emails, that conversations back and forth between families are also just as important. So connecting with support groups, I mentioned autism sharing and parenting. There are other support groups that are available in the neighborhood. And if there isn't a support group available, a parent can certainly start one.
Absolutely.
And they can reach out to Autism Sharing and Parenting and find out ways to be able to do that. It's very helpful for a parent to know another parent.
Sure. There's, and I just wanted to throw out there myself that there's also a list of resources that's put together and updated annually by the Philadelphia Autism Network, which is a group of providers that gets together on a bi-monthly basis, I guess it is. It's kind of termed the A-list. So if you call up Elwyn and ask for the A-list, then you'll come across that.
And the other really great thing is that now Denny O'Brien's in the city, and he's been such a huge advocate.
Denny O'Brien, of course, being the city council member, former Speaker of the House and Pennsylvania Senate.
So we're really lucky to have him focused on the city with these efforts.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're moving forward. And now, of course, we come to the topic of schools. Now families have been presented with the initial diagnosis. Now, how do we access the right educational interventions? What do families have to navigate through that system? And would you like to start with that? I know Felicia works with several families on these issues.
Yeah, I think parents have to now embrace another full-time job. So first they have to learn about what interventions might help their child, how to get those interventions. Then they have to learn the skill of advocacy, and they have to learn how to really fight for appropriate services for their children. In this day of tight budgets, it's expensive to give an appropriate education to children. And so even the best intentioned school is still going to have to, sometimes, or is going to try to put limits. And of course the family wants services that will get the child to the best outcome that's possible. The law maintains that it has to be an appropriate education for a child with a disability, appropriate not being best. And so there's sometimes differences of opinion about how that will be worked out. The parent has to learn all about very challenging laws, regulations, potentially case law, in order to be able to be successful in obtaining the services the child needs. And the stakes are quite high for families, so that's the other thing. It's very emotional. I know many parents who have, become ill worrying about their child's outcome while
literally
fighting.
Ill.
Literally ill, like needing to go to the hospital, needing to, not being able to work anymore because they're so stressed trying to argue for appropriate services. And so this is another case where families need to connect together. Parents meeting with other parents and talking about advocacy strategies. I've been involved with the Council for Parent Attorneys and Advocates, COPA. That's a national organization, and that has great information for families about advocacy. They have a website, they have regular listservs, and parents can write in with the advocacy questions, or advocates can write in. Parents can hire advocates to help them.
That's right.
They just have to make sure that they hire advocates who have the same philosophy that they have, and so a certain amount of
I think
research is necessary.
One of the things, that even as if you start with early intervention and you're talking about a young child, and then you're looking at education. One of the differences in terms of public schools and private schools is that public, as Felicia mentioned, it talks about an appropriate education. But you'll hear the phrase FAPE, which stands for free and appropriate public education. So public schools have a legal obligation to provide a free and appropriate public education. One of the things that parents look to do is to understand those processes. And yes, it's a lot more detailed than this, but there really is a three-step process, and the first process starts with an evaluation. And so when that evaluation occurs, as I said earlier, parents have to be involved. So an evaluation also allows for a parent to put in their perspective of what happens with the child.
Or should allow for that.
Yeah.
Well, but again, from an advocacy standpoint, a parent needs to be able to say, even if they've written it with paper and pencil, to put in their perspective on what their child can do. That needs to be a part of that evaluation. And then there's, you start to learn, I call it specialese as its own language. You start to learn different phrases and different terms. And one very important term is called an IEP, and that term stands for an individual education plan. And that certainly is the document that should and will, if you've advocated correctly, guide the educational plan.
It's always good to ask, I think, the professional that's working with you to write their report in a way that's helpful in getting a good individualized educational plan with measurable goals. And I know it's always my pleasure to call a school. It's really intimidating, I think, to be a parent at that meeting with all these professionals that are deciding what your child needs and also paying for it. So there's a little conflict of interest there. And it's, you know, it's such an emotional meeting like you're describing. So I know, at least for me, like I'm always happy to make a phone call, and sometimes that makes a huge difference.
It does.
To have, not me particularly, but any professional sort of do a little advocacy is huge.
And let me just mention that third thing, because I did say there were three things. There's the evaluation, there's the IEP, and the third piece of that is what's called a NOREP, which stands for the Notice of Recommended Educational Placement. And that's the document that goes back and looks at, or the professional who's writing it, looks at the evaluation report, looks at the services that have been identified through a team, an IEP team, to talk about the plan, the individualized education plan. And then that Notice of Recommended Educational Placement talks about where and how those services will be provided.
And they have to be individualized.
They have to be individualized. And then there's one piece that I always say in terms of special education. Number one, you should talk about access to a regular curriculum, because that's the goal, to be able to have a free and appropriate education just like everyone else. But if it's deemed that the child is needing special education services, they are not a place, they are a service. And it should not, ideally, depend on where the child is. Those services and supports and related supports should help the child gain access to free and appropriate education, free and appropriate public education, regardless of where they are.
Well, here at LaSalle, both undergrad and graduate, you know, I represent special education. And we talk about IEPs, and I've done this in 3 states. I think I've written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of IEPs.
And parents feel like we've written hundreds.
That's right, that's right, the same over here. We talked about the strengths, we talked about FAPE and so forth. We're always in the IEP, and we're very, very comprehensive in our coursework and preparing our teachers with a dual certification. But those measurable goals,
absolutely,
it's the measurable goals, and they're not easy to write, because I take them from scratch, from a case study, okay? And I said, no, what is realistic over, say, an academic year, 10 months? We're not talking extended school year, ESY over here. And then you look at the percentage. Okay, the child baseline over here, you know, over an academic year, can do this, what, 85% of the time, whatever it may be. But then it's the strategies. What are the strategies to, you know, attain and to be successful with that measurable goal? Also, the expectations. Now, I don't know if we can get Johnny to this point. The other thing is, there's a formula, and the state has, PD has a formula that's written into the IEP when you talk about the percentage in general ed. And the push is for inclusion, all right? So we have to look at that percentage very carefully. And in the beginning of the school year, with the related services and the duration and the minutes and so forth. That's mandatory.
Right.
And so if they're seeing a speech-language pathologist twice a week, we have to make sure that that's all covered.
Absolutely.
I wanted to jump in and just go on a little bit about inclusion, because I think that
and inclusion, of course, the child being within a regular education
general
classroom
population,
with other typically developing peers.
And I think we have to look at meaningful inclusion. So I've seen a lot of IEPs where on paper it says the child is in inclusion, in other words, with the general population, 30% of the time. But okay, they're in the cafeteria with the other children, but there's the autism table with the aide where the child has to sit. And there's the autism group at recess that's all together with the aide. And there's the autism corner of the special art class or whatever. And it's not meaningful. So meaningful inclusion is where the child gets to interact and is supported.
Yes.
Socially supported to interact with the other children.
We see that in cooperative learning, okay? When you have, say, the atypical child, but it's not, Bobby you'll hear with the special ed teacher sitting next to him. That's not inclusion. But if you put them into a cooperative learning group, and wait a minute, they have outstanding skills. So now that's going to be Johnny's responsibility, because that's his strength. And so he's going to shine over there. And he's going to be respected for that too.
And what you've just described would be what, from a parent perspective, I might call a best practice. The challenge is making sure that what happens and what's written on the IEP actually happens in a classroom. And I think all of us would be remiss in if we didn't mention the teacher as a huge part of that, particularly as we talk about public education, and making sure that as parents, there's a good relationship between not only the teacher in the classroom, but also the principal of the school. I found success in making sure that those introductions happen early on as a preventive or proactive measure, so that as the school year goes along and as the parent then develops a relationship and understands a lot of what you just said from a parent perspective. I understand it because I speak specialese now.
That's right.
But there are a lot of
we all do here.
But there are a lot of parents that don't. They just want to know how they can support the family, the child when the child comes home from school, and what that looks like.
What we're really stressing too, and I think you would appreciate, is the co-teaching model. Okay, so we have the general ed and the special educator, but they don't know which is which over here because they're the differentiated instruction is going on. That's not just for special needs.
Absolutely.
That's for the general public right there.
And that's really where we have to start focusing our attention. You can speak to that.
Yeah, there might be somebody unidentified, that
that's right.
also will benefit, by teaching to the margins, you're really capturing everybody as part of universal design.
That's it.
Just like that ramp can be used by a wheelchair and a walker and a mom with a stroller.
Exactly.
And of course, autism is a spectrum, and you can be just below the cutoff for that spectrum, but still have many of the needs. And so a co-teaching classroom would serve that. But I wanted to mention that maybe what a parent should look for if the child is being included for an adequate period of time is that the child should be talking about neurotypical peers. They should have friends. They should be invited to parties.
That's right.
It shouldn't be, oh yeah, I don't know any of those kids at all except the kids in my autism resource class, which I do see a lot.
And I just want to say that I think that's part of the struggle with the IEP in terms of autism is that traditionally these areas of education are sort of reading, writing, math. When with autism, it's that social piece.
It's the social.
And a lot of schools will say, well, that's not academic, that's not our responsibility, but according to the law, it is. And I think that's why it's so great to hear that you're teaching the IEPs, because and I think I think the other important thing, just as we talk about community later, is that it's sort of artificial to just teach socialization in the classroom or in the therapy room. It needs to be in the community.
The goal, and I think you all agree here, that the goal in regard to the special needs population is generalization.
Yes.
So I tell my students, I said, okay, here's the safe environment of your classroom.
Right.
Okay, but wait a minute, Johnny has to go further out.
Absolutely.
Further out.
Right.
further out.
Right, right.
If I mentioned best practices, what I think would also be helpful, and again, I'm not sure if this exists anywhere, it may exist at the Ladder Center, there also should be a connection with the parents to help with that generalization.
Piece. Yes. Yeah.
Because often, from a parent perspective, as they learn about autism, as they learn about their child's strengths, but they also learn about the challenges, and they're realistic challenges. Their concerns become that the child make progress educationally, but also be able to navigate in the community and in typically everyday activities. And sometimes from a parent perspective, you may tend to be protective or overprotective, which parents often get accused of anyway. Sure. But I think it's a realistic concern. And so parents often have concerns about that generalization if there's not explanations given about what that really means.
And also preparation for.
Absolutely.
I have a senior right now in student teaching, and his student, focus student, goes out for one period, and the anxiety. And I'm saying the preparation wasn't there.
Right.
And I think that what we're looking at now is a system where, here at LaSalle, there's a certification program that that prepares teachers to recognize those issues.
Oh, yes.
Developmentally, we have to have the pediatricians on board to understand what that, not just the initial developmental milestones, but what happens as they start to age up. And then when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking with Felicia a little bit on how we prepare for post-high school, whether that's college, whether that's going to the workplace, perhaps some living arrangements, and talking with how everybody feels about where we are in that process. How accessible are we as a entire society to embracing the ASD community and really becoming part of that community in a broad macro sense. So as we start to come back from the break, we will be addressing those issues, and we will see you soon. Thank you very much.
Savings Man here with a story for you about two young spenders named Tommy and Sue. Their parents let them buy whatever they chose, like video games and designer clothes. As they grew older, they spent all their pay on fancy cars, houses, 2 lattes a day. They lived in the moment, never saving a dime. When they tried to retire, they run out of time. Working forever is Tom and Sue's fate, so choose to save now before it's too late. Visit our website to find out more, 'cause a happy ending's worth saving for.
Travel advisories to small business loans, student loans to taxes online. Whether you have information to get or ideas to give, USA.gov is the official place to connect with your government. From surplus car auctions to finding a new job, our new mobile apps will keep you updated on the go. So check out USA.gov, because the country runs better when we stay connected.
Johnson, it's time to start saving.
This savings wake-up call is brought to you by your friends at Choose to Save.
This is not a race. On the road to financial independence, the winners are the ones who stay the course. Learn more about securing your financial future and choose to save. It will pay off in the long run.
And now, another adventure with Savings Man.
Oh dear, I can't afford that.
Charge it. You can pay it off later.
Not so fast, credit card guy.
Savings Man.
Don't let him entice you, ma'am. Credit card guy can lead you to big trouble. You need a savings plan.
You're right, Savings Man.
Get this ballpark estimate worksheet at choosetosave.org. It will help you get started.
Gee, thanks, Savings Man.
No, thank you.
So visit choosetosave.org and get your ballpark estimate today.
Welcome back for our third and final segment in this program. We've been discussing how families can be supported, and then how families can move into the school systems with their children to gain support for them in those settings, whether it be in a traditional autism support classroom or in inclusion settings. We'd like to move now on to the transition to adulthood and the factors that need to be considered when supporting individuals who are diagnosed with autism and their families as they age up. Autism spectrum disorder is just that, a spectrum of differences. There are, of course, many movies and television shows and so on that now focus on the higher functioning, if you will, individuals on the autism spectrum. But we are talking about an entire spectrum. There are individuals who are more severely affected and those who are less severely affected, and those that are affected in very different ways that make less severe disabilities seem more difficult. I'd like to first start off by talking about and allowing some feedback on what some of these needs might be, perhaps from the state level, what we've identified, maybe working down into Philadelphia and sharing some experiences that we've had. I know, Wendy, you had a point that you wanted to bring up.
I think it would be great to mention that we have a really great advocate in the Bureau of Autism Services, which Walt Cote runs, and they did the largest needs assessment in the country. Was done here in Pennsylvania for families and for individuals with autism, but a lot of the people that responded were the higher functioning group, and I don't know that so it was an amazing study, but I think, Sabra, you can talk more about the needs of sort of some of the other groups that we still need to reach out to.
Absolutely, and I always mention the fact that it is a spectrum because there are challenges that happen when a child may be nonverbal, or a child may meet some of the milestones a lot later than your typical child. Some of the issues can often revolve around toilet training. Some of the issues can revolve around behavioral health concerns. And those issues are significant. There are times when within the public school system there may be a need for an approved private school placement. And that's some of the things that happen as a result of the individual education plan team and discussions around how those needs can be met. And from a parent perspective, we always talk about being informed about what those options are. But as Felicia mentioned, the folks that have significant challenges still have needs in terms of transition. You still look at what skills they have and what possibilities are available to them. It requires that the types of assessments that are given are paid attention to and looking to find the individual skills of the person on the spectrum so that the best that life can offer can be available to them.
I think those individual skills are hugely important. I think that Nina's study reflected the point that the majority of autistic adults are unemployed despite the fact that they have significant skills that could be beneficial to various industries.
Which is where the community comes into play. I mean, we do have to look at community businesses, community organizations, and have them recognize where skills can be used and what jobs can be available to folks who have these skills.
In addition, in education, we need to focus on preparing children from the time they're young for eventual further education or employment. And I think the research community and to some extent the advocacy community has been focused on early childhood. Let's get these children identified. Let's figure out who has autism. It's very important to try to remediate as early as possible. And there's been less focus on, well, all these children are going to become adults, and what are we going to do with them? And even if they had a superb education, K through 12, they're going to spend most of their life as adults.
Right. Absolutely.
And what we're finding is a lot of these adults just spend all their time, on their parents' couch watching TV or playing video games because there hasn't been a plan in place.
And there hasn't been a plan for them or for the community to have this ramp for them. So I think that's also, And when my families go to bed at night, they're not really focusing about the cause or the cure anymore. They're really wondering what's going to happen to their child, which has to do with independence in the community.
I think for a lot of parents, they're trying to put out fires. So, this emergency, that emergency, child was sent home from school today for a behavior problem, child has a health issue. And looking at that far future, what are we going to do 5 years from now when all services end and the child becomes an adult? They just don't have time to plan for that. And so it's a charge of the systems to really start refocusing and looking at where is this child's path going? Should we really be focusing on trigonometry for a child who maybe could start to learn a vocational skill so that they could actually be in a job? If they're not going to need trigonometry, but they are going to need carpentry, maybe there should be some carpentry.
What you're describing is really a paradigm shift. You're asking systems to do things that they've done in very different ways. And not you individually, all of us really are looking at systems and having them provide services in different ways. So it requires some different thinking. It requires discussions not only about what the individual skill set is, but what the system provides and what they can do differently and what they may emphasize differently to be able to provide those services within the community and also to meet the individual needs of the person.
So we need to start really assessing the strengths, which is we were saying earlier. We need to assess the strengths and we need to think about what's a viable plan for these students. And then the other thing that is not happening with transition right now is that students with autism need self-advocacy skills. Once they become adults, they need to be able to assert themselves, say what they want. They need to be able to determine their own lives. Even individuals who are not fully verbal still have preferences, still have desires, still want a high quality of life. They don't want to be forced to do a job that they hate, just like the rest of us.
That's right.
And they can express that if given an opportunity.
Here at LaSalle, we recognize everything that has been said so far in the program. When we look at special needs, it's always focused on families. It's always focused on families. And we have the Ladder Center here, which is LaSalle Autism, Developmental Disabilities, Education and Resources. And the shift has gone to transition now. And when I go into the schools, okay, maybe carpentry is the issue, okay? Maybe computer programming is the issue and so forth. And it's mandatory on the IEP at 14 years of age. We provide workshops, and there's workshops every single month in regard to navigating the system. Where do I get financial support? Where do I go with a therapeutic support staff and so forth? Help me with the IEP. Can I have an advocate at the IEP conference and so forth? We have what referrals our speech language pathology department right here on campus. You can bring your child. And what's very unique is I'm involved in cross-discipline with psychology and marriage family therapy. So you can set up at the Ladder Center. You can make an appointment and say the parents or the entire family want to come in for therapy. Yes. The education system, say you want to receive therapy with a MFT. We'll take the children.
Marriage and family therapy.
Yeah, marriage family therapy, okay. We will take the children, and we have an entire program for the children. We've also brought in the Carden Institute with music, dance, and art therapy. So we're extending and extending and extending, and also social work is involved with this. So what they're saying is the focus on the family.
Well, it comes back to accessibility.
It does.
How do families access these services? Knocking on the door of the Ladder program, coming to Drexel's Autism Support Program. Maybe you can speak a little bit about that. Going to some of Wendy's initiatives in creating access to the community, autism sharing and parenting to develop those networks early on. Maybe we can highlight just a couple additional details on those initiatives, because I think they were very important to people want to know about how to access these.
Well, the Drexel Autism Support Program really has two prongs. So one is direct services for people with autism who are attending Drexel, and then secondly, changing the community, in this case the Drexel community, to make them more, or to allow them to see more about autism, to learn about the strengths of people with autism, to allow them to appreciate people with autism. So we do trainings for faculty, staff, groups like the resident hall advisors.
Right.
We do peer mentor training, where we train typically developing students to be paired with students with autism and to basically allow them to have somebody to go to ask silly questions or to learn how to navigate Drexel, which can be kind of challenging.
That's right.
And so the peer mentors are actually learning at the same time.
At the same time.
And we see this as kind of an equivalent relationship where both sides are learning from the other rather than the peer mentors somehow mothering or fathering the students. And we really like to have a strength-based approach. And I think this kind of model can be brought into other areas, to the community. So you could have peer mentorship outside of a university setting very readily, and I think that's where this needs to go. We need employers who have a peer mentor program and who then have training about autism in their job site, and then also have special people who are going to pair up and help navigate all those unanswered questions when you come into a new job. And you're supposed to figure it out.
Exactly.
Right.
One of the other things that certainly is a natural outcome as we talk about transition from schools and transition to adulthood is the issue of housing and where family members on the spectrum are going to live and what level of independence they are capable of and are willing to participate in. And so some of the discussions that I'm having with systems within the city, both private and public, are the issues of how housing can be made available and made accessible to folks on the spectrum. And again, that range of people on the spectrum. Because with a little bit of support, sometimes there's no support needed. Sometimes it may just mean that they're roommates or they're carry on with their lives. Yet in other situations, there may be a need for a significant level of support, and the different systems may or may not be prepared for what the specific needs are. So we are certainly in discussions about making sure that housing is appropriate and available in Philadelphia.
There are some great models that are out there for housing, but they certainly don't meet the need, especially the need that's going to be, that we're going to be facing over the next several years when we, in essence, increase the adult population with autism by about 7.5-fold, according to what the state is telling us so far.
Well, I often say that people say that there's a wave of people on the autism coming, and I say that we're standing in the tsunami now.
Well, sure.
The need is great now, whether it's the young ones, whether it's middle school, high school, or adults.
Yeah, and that transition planning really needs to start, like everybody's saying, with the family when you're much younger, travel instruction, so that even if you can be employable, that you can get to your job. Shouldn't really start at 17. You need to be on SEPTA as a kid with your family. If your family's afraid to do that, you're not going to be able to do that second order thinking when you're older. So
you need to be able to cross the street.
Right. So what we try to do is really educate the community, and we're starting a program with SEPTA, reaching out to the community to have them be ready to have those ramps and to prepare families, and then to have supported practice to ramp up to independence.
There's been, and you're well aware, an increase in autistic support classrooms. And you talk about the little ones, okay. But then the school districts say, oh, but that little one now has to go to middle school. And then the middle school has to go to high school. And well, we need the training. We need the expertise, and I'm coming again from the education system here. So we put together a certificate in autism on the graduate level. And we're talking about from birth, okay, through adulthood in the coursework, preparing them hopefully for society and wherever they can fit, So I think we're all talking about the same thing, but with the focus on the family, and as much as we can, get to that generalization.
And I think schools have to begin to address adaptive skills, like you were saying,
That's
traveling, being able to cook for yourself, being able to clean up for yourself. Those kinds of skills are often not addressed at all, and even very high-functioning individuals might not have those adaptive skills. So you might have somebody who is taking trigonometry and calculus, but still can't make a basic meal for himself.
And the challenge there is the issue of funding for those activities. And again, from a parent perspective, advocacy has to happen. Pennsylvania has often been on the forefront of making systems changes, with the parents being the ones kind of pushing and nudging and helping those systems make those changes. So from an advocacy perspective, parents always have to be aware and informed of what the best practices are so that they can help the systems meet those best practices.
I don't know if we're out of time, but I would like to see by high school the student with autism should be participating in their own IEP meetings and any advocacy regarding them.
And they
should be right
and
there.
They should.
And very often in Pennsylvania, what I see is they're not included. They're supposed to be included.
They are.
But they're
supposed to be
told,
included.
well, you can show up, but don't.
Yeah. You can show up for 5 minutes and then send back to class.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, then we're going to talk about you. I think we're all talking about a paradigm shift.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's really exciting to be
Yes.
with a group of people who have that perspective.
And it's our responsibility to make this, to have the special needs, be an advocate for himself, herself.
Yes,
absolutely.
Now, as far as getting into the community, and we don't have time to get into this in depth, but making every place that a child or an adult visits in the community an accessible place, a welcoming place, is really the mission of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yes.
You know, I don't know if you want to spend 10 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, if I had my way, and what we try to do is we'd like to get a certificate out there for everyone in the public, and just like, you know, it would be a physical ramp, but instead it would be a ramp of social learning and thinking and acceptance, and more than even accessibility, more inclusion, and, you know, beyond outreach would be engagement. And so that's what I'd really love to see, because you hear these stories of people who are qualified for whatever kind of job it is, but then their employer maybe doesn't understand and isn't quite tolerant because they don't understand. So it is that bridge that we need to build, not, you know, so I'm
It's
just
educating
hoping.
society.
Yeah,
But there's some small changes that can happen with that as well. From a parent perspective, systems often don't recognize that there are parents working. Sometimes there's one parent who's struggling to just make ends meet. Even with a two-parent family, if both parents are working, where's the time to go to the meetings and help the systems change? So it really is incumbent on us as a society, I think, my opinion, is that if everyone tries a little bit, then the things can happen in a more structured fashion.
And I want to thank all of you for the wonderful work that you're doing in bringing this together. I know that it's a daunting task, to say the least, and we need everyone out there to join us in this process as we create accessibility for individuals diagnosed with autism and their families. Thank you very much for joining us today.
I mean, this month, I guess now. So I've been working hard, you know, but we're completely unfunded, so there's a limit to, you know, there's a limit. Well, no, I'm funded.